Excellent. Thank you so much. Brilliant. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to wish everyone a good afternoon and thank everybody for joining us today. On the call this afternoon is myself, Carinne Louth. I'm the head of channel for Certes Networks. Presenting this afternoon, we have Paul German, who's our CEO for Certes, and Matt Cable, who's our CTO for Certes. Purpose of this call this afternoon and the format of this call is really an open conversation. So I'd like to invite anyone who's on the call today to feel free to ask us questions as we go along using the Q&A tab at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar. So if there's any pertinent questions that come up while we're discussing the topics, I'll interrupt the team and just sort of so we can throw those and try and have an open dialogue as we go through. So for the purposes of this webinar, I'm making a couple of assumptions, and one is that the audience here have a deep understanding of SD-WAN and also have a good knowledge and understanding of what Certes do as well. So if anyone has anything to add, obviously just let us know through the webinar, but for now I'm going to hand over to Paul and I'll see you guys at the end.
Thanks very much, Carinne, and good afternoon, everybody. So really just cover off what we would like to go through on the webinar today. Obviously, is to provide an introduction to what is high assurance SD-WAN, really why is it needed, and who are we targeting with high assurance SD-WAN. And then once we've covered off those points, what we'd like to do is really just touch on the technology behind high assurance SD-WAN, and then really just open it up for Q&A. So starting off with the first slide around what is high assurance SD-WAN. So high assurance SD-WAN is not a technology, it's a framework. And that framework has come about because with Certes working in the high assurance verticals, those being government, public sector, and what we call regulated enterprise, we've been having more and more conversations with those customers around their digital transformation aspirations and how they move forward with technologies like cloud and obviously to get there, SD-WAN. So there have been some challenges for our customers when having those conversations, and we'll touch on some of those today. But the purpose behind high assurance SD-WAN is that the framework itself makes SD-WAN as a technology a viable option for customers who sit in those high assurance verticals. Again, those being government customers, public sector customers, or customers in the regulated enterprise verticals who have to have a specific level of control around their data security posture. So in no way are we talking about the security capabilities of SD-WAN as a technology or any other any other security functions that customers might have, but really just pointing out that the customers that Certes work with typically are focused at both network security to keep the network itself secure, but also they have specific and particular requirements around how they protect sensitive data within their environment. And when we talk about bringing together SD-WAN and Certes high assurance overlay to bring together or bring to market what we call this high assurance SD-WAN offering, what we're doing is allowing some key security or information assurance principles to be delivered as part of that offering, and those can really be summarized in the 4 bullets that are on the slide around zero trust, around the separation of duties, around micro-segmentation, or as you'll hear in the presentation, crypto segmentation as it's referred to in Certes, and then a really interesting aspect of encryption offload and why, we'll talk a little bit more in the webinar about why that's really important. But first off, what I'd like to do is really touch on, where did this and why did this really happen? Why did we have to really build this framework around high assurance SD-WAN? So moving on, as you'd expect, we talk to many chief information security officers. And when we start looking at these organizations that we work with, the CISO is typically working alongside 2 other key roles within that organization. One of those being the chief technology officer and the infrastructure departments that will sit underneath that chief technology officer, and the other being the office of the data protection officer and the roles that sit under the data protection remit. Now, obviously, both of those sit on the opposing end of a very significant sort of balancing scale that the CISO has to work alongside. Obviously, the CISO has a responsibility to the technology, the chief technology officer, and that line of business, enabling them to do the innovative things that CTOs need to be doing, but also secondarily has a key responsibility also to the data protection office to make sure that anything that is undertaken by the business in terms of technology innovation doesn't introduce risks that either are unforeseen or unmeasured within the organization. So when talking to these CISOs, we talk about some of our key value points. The first one around the fact that Certes very much delivers on this concept of zero trust. So when we look at zero trust, we think about users, we think about applications, we think about data, we think about locations, and the fact that all of these are connected together. But when we start looking at zero trust, there's an implicit message around an implied distrust of the underlying infrastructure. So whether that's LAN, WAN, whatever, the whole emphasis is around trust being something that is built, not just assumed in the underlying infrastructure. So with Certes, we very much tackle the trust issues around information assurance or data in motion protection. And what we provide is that software-defined information assurance layer that sits on top of any network infrastructure, but provides adequate or necessary controls around the data flows as they come from users, applications, or locations such as data centers or branches, before that data actually gets onto the physical network, before it's routed or forwarded. So before the data actually gets onto the network, it's been assured or it's been protected using policies defined by the security or data protection role, using keys or encryption keys that only they have access to. And what that does is really touch on a really important area of discussion that we have with our customers, and that's around that key difference between the role of the CTO and the role of the DPO. Now, when you're a chief information security officer and you're working alongside both of these roles, the chief technology officer is very much focused on planning for innovation and infrastructure changes that will allow them to either do things better or to financially save on budgets when it comes to the technologies that are being used. Whereas the data protection officer is very much a risk officer. So looking at everything that the organization is doing, not just technology, but it includes technology, but understanding what data is using the technology that's being deployed by the CTO and the relevant offices under the CTO, and how that could impact their data security posture. Obviously, a lot of our data is digital now, so it really is the key mechanism for moving that very expensive resource being sensitive data. So the fact that we can introduce this concept of separation of duties, meaning that our technology allows the data protection officer to provide a necessary control within the organization to protect data as it moves across the network according to policies that they define, they outline within their information assurance profiles and alike, using encryption keys that only they have access to, but in a way where it has very little to zero impact to the initiatives underway within the teams that sit underneath the chief technology officer. That's something that traditionally has been very difficult to balance in terms of technology, but you'll hear more today about some of our capabilities to offer that separation of duties so that the data protection officer can be comfortable with their data security posture, and the chief technology officer can make decisions that allow them to remain innovative and allow them to maintain projects that move their organization forward. So I'm just going to stop there for a second. Matt, is there anything that you'd like to add on those points?
No, I think you've definitely covered those. I think I'd like to extend, the concept of that separation is very important when you're dealing with organizations, and that separation is very, very blurred within those organizations, and that's very difficult to achieve. So some of the things you're describing are really key to that CISO role, and absolutely, that is kind of top of mind of certainly that zero trust model.
Yeah, and sort of the next thing when we're talking about risk, for me, certainly from a data protection perspective, risk is something best carved up. Reduced Gartner calls it a reduced scope of trust. So understanding what risk items they have within the environment when it comes to data protection, and minimizing them into smaller, reduced scopes of trust, so that should there be a compromise of any specific data segment or scope of trust, then what happens is, and I think the next slide touches on this very well, is that actually it's not an enterprise or a business-wide event that happens. It's something that's limited or segmented down to something that has been deemed acceptable. Of course, no data or network compromise is ever acceptable, but these things do happen, and it's understanding that when they do happen, how do we reduce their impact? And I think this is a really great slide that shows the benefits of micro-segmentation. And we don't only use that concept in technology. As we can see, we use it all over the world in different areas of innovation. And really what it is to do is to make sure that when any one compromise happens, it doesn't sink the ship. So with our ability to define specific policies according to the value of the data that's being carried across the environment, and implementing those segments using our cryptographic engine or our encryption, means that we can really help our customers with their drive to micro-segment their environment. And I think moving on is another key area that we talk to our customers about, because when you recognize that data has a particular value, and with our customers it has a very high level of value, then encryption or protection of that data is really top of mind. How do I encrypt that data? But typically, encryption or cryptography has, if it's done within the network, has a very, very high cost on that network, both operationally and in terms of performance. And what Certes provides is the ability to offload that encryption function into our software-defined information assurance layer, so that the network can just do its routing and switching, its forwarding, so it can do what it has to do best, and leave the protection of data to the Certes overlay. We saw this many years ago. If we go back years and years, when we first started deploying web applications and we moved to encryption within the web application, well, soon we understood that actually the web applications didn't scale because of the overhead of having to utilize encryption. And what they did was we developed technologies to offload that encryption onto another layer, so the web servers could do what they do best, and the encryption servers could do what they do best. Like that, the exact same is happening now within these high assurance customers, where the need to protect data is becoming so high, the cost of encryption is impacting the performance and the operational visibility within the environment. And we're now looking at ways to offload that encryption from the network in a way where we can maintain or ascertain higher levels of protection of data, but also in a way where it doesn't affect the visibility of the operational network. And again, that's a unique selling point for Certes because of our patented layer 4 encryption. Really, from a network perspective, the network looks and behaves the same after Certes is deployed as it did before. So when we're moving on, moving on to sort of just high assurance SD-WAN, now what problem is it we're solving? You know, when we're talking to the CISOs, what are they telling us? Well, they're telling us that the CTO is coming to them and they're saying, hey, there's this great technology that provides agility, provides cost saves to the organization, and we want to deploy it, and it's called SD-WAN. And we've then got the data protection officers saying, well, understand that the technology is viable, but from a risk perspective, there are some risks that we need to evaluate before we take that step and move away from a private MPLS service onto an SD-WAN solution. So what does that, you know, what does that problem that the DPOs are raising really look like? So this is a very simple diagram. So we've got two flows of data. I know that there's many more in an organization, but we can get the point across with just two flows of data. So here we've got the green flow being our SaaS app flow. So what we're saying is that that's cloud-based or cloud destined. It's got to go out over the internet to get to Facebook.com, Salesforce.com, something that's out there on the internet. And then we have our sensitive or business data that obviously needs to be handled carefully within the environment. So that data is obviously going to be routed using the SD-WAN solution. And the SD-WAN solution is building, it's utilizing IPsec as a mechanism to connect all of these different locations together to create that software-defined WAN. So what we're looking at is that the software-defined WAN will have the ability, will have the intelligence to route the data destined for the internet, for those cloud apps, directly to the internet. Why route it across the IPsec tunnel when you're connected to the internet? You can steer it off locally and save that backhaul bandwidth. But likewise, it needs to make the right decision when it comes to sensitive data and make sure that that sensitive data actually goes through that IPsec tunnel, and then it maintains its privacy. It stays within the business environment, and as long as everything works like that, that's great. That's absolutely fantastic. But one of the things that we're hearing from more and more DPOs is well, we need to look at what happens when things don't quite work as we expect, whether that's through configuration mistakes, whether that's through anomalies in software, or just something happens. So they're quite happy that data that is destined for the internet goes straight out onto the internet. That's fine. But their big question is, what happens when my sensitive data inadvertently goes out onto the internet? Now that's obviously a big risk area for them, because that is sensitive or maybe regulated data. There could be financial penalties or worse that happens to the organization. So it's for many DPOs, it's a risk too far. So it just stops the project in its tracks. But what we'll talk to you about today is really answering the question that the CISO brings to us, which is, you need to help me make the move to SD-WAN, because the person in that role understands the benefits of SD-WAN to the organization. Clearly the CTO does, and so does the DPO, but the data protection officer sees that the risks outweigh the benefits to the organization. So what does high assurance SD-WAN bring to the table? Well, what we talk to our customers about is, we can introduce what we call a trust boundary. And at this trust boundary, we have a Certes enforcement point. And what that Certes enforcement point does is it's responsible for deploying the policies that protect the data that flows through the enforcement point according to the policies defined by the data protection officer, using keys that only they have access to. And touching on that point that we made earlier around separation of duties, we have the red Certes enforcement point that is, whilst it's an infrastructure component, is actually managed from an orchestration perspective by the data protection team. And we've got the SD-WAN router that is a network or an infrastructure item that is managed by the infrastructure team. So we've got that clear separation of duties. Now, we've also got this ability for the data to flow transparently through the Certes enforcement point, and whatever policies have been deployed or defined by the data protection team, the data is then protected according to those policies. So it could be, as we see with the protected data classes here on the slide, that the data going through is micro-segmented into its own policy. So each of those policies has a different encryption key. So should any malware or any bad actor gain access to the network, we're actually preventing that lateral movement from one segment to another. So we're meeting the micro-segmentation needs of our customers. Likewise, as I said earlier, the data protection officer is not really interested in data that's bound for the internet. So they can define a policy to say, well, that stuff that's bound for the internet, we'll just leave it alone and we'll pass it in the clear, and we'll allow it to just go on its way to the SD-WAN router and then onwards to its destination. But the key area of interest for the data protection officers with High Assurance SD-WAN is the fact that with the data being micro-segmented, the micro-segmentation is carried through and onto the other end of the SD-WAN. So the SD-WAN becomes now a micro-segmented SD-WAN, and they have the knowledge that should any micro-segment be routed outside of the SD-WAN, so let's say clear onto the internet, that actually that micro-segment, the data within that micro-segment remains protected because it's been protected on the Certes enforcement point according to a policy that the DPO has defined using keys that only they have access to. So a really key point there, we are mitigating the risk around that sensitive data inadvertently being routed out onto the open internet. And in addition,
sorry,
yes,
Paul, we've got a question come in to say, can I still utilize this if I haven't yet deployed the SD-WAN?
So that's a really good question. So where we are typically working with many customers is actually on their migration to SD-WAN, because they're really particular around their data security posture. They deploy Certes as a control on top of their WAN environment today. So it could be an MPLS WAN. So you see here on the slide, we've got SD-WAN stroke WAN router, right? So the Certes can be deployed on top of the MPLS WAN. And then what it does, it provides the necessary data assurance control so that the migration to the SD-WAN can take place. Does that answer the question?
I believe so. Yeah, I think that pretty much. And I think I'll just add to that, Paul, is that, you know, the customer base that we're working with today typically are, you know, are having that approach to that hybrid deployment of, you know, traditional networking in terms of, you know, we talk about MPLS and others. Yeah. And there will be a large group of those customers who will maintain that without the migration to perhaps SD-WAN. But specifically, this is allowing them to not just provide the assurance across that MPLS, but now across, you know, that hybrid environment whilst they're deploying that SD-WAN. And potentially, if they go full SD-WAN in the future, you know, at all points that Certes enforcement is providing that data classification and being able to kind of still segment that data no matter where it's going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Matt, it's really important for us to remember that actually SD-WAN is just a a connection type for us. It's a technology to move data, and we can work transparently over the top of any technology, right? We have customers that have us deployed over MPLS, Metro E, satellite connectivity. So SD-WAN is just another one of those transports that we work over. What makes us unique, though, about operating with an SD-WAN environment is that it's only made possible by the fact that we have our patented layer 4 encryption capability. If we were to use, let's say, standard IPsec encryption, then actually we would blind the SD-WAN router and it wouldn't be able to do its job. So, so the fact that we allow this micro-segmentation, that we allow the packets really from a network perspective to look the same after we've protected them as they did before, means that actually the SD-WAN router, or the SD-WAN solution, sorry, maintains its value, its high level of value to our customers. So so just moving on to the next slide, going back to the added benefit is here that if the Certes enforcement point is doing the protection of the data, then actually what we can do is we can utilize a protocol that's lighter weight in terms of its processing requirements on the SD-WAN solution. And I know, Matt, we've done a lot of testing around this. Because, you know, a lot of the conversations that we have with customers is that actually my SD-WAN solution, maybe the scalability issues don't allow them to deploy it as widespread as they want to. And in fact, we say to them that, look, if we're deploying a high assurance SD-WAN, then actually the SD-WAN technology you're using can just utilize a GRE tunnel or something lightweight to build the SD-WAN itself, because the data is already protected. You don't need that IPsec to protect the data. So Matt, yeah, anything to add on that? I know we've been working on this for a while now for some customers.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think just to add to that, you know, the offload is, you know, that option that we can provide the customer. And so it allows them, like you say, that benefit, but it also, you know, they have a choice here. You know, they can still maintain the IPsec portion, but, you know, it gives them another layer of options to allow the SD-WAN to do and the WAN router to do what its function is, rather than you know, the cryptography requirements that can be very heavy, and you know, sizing and other things will come into play on those.
Yeah, and I think that moves us on nicely to the next slide, Matt, where, you know, when we're obviously, once we've talked to customers about our capabilities, it's about, well, how do I deploy you within my environment? Now, obviously, we've got physical appliances we can deploy within the environment. We can also operate in virtual and soon to be cloud environments. Is there anything to add to that?
No, exactly that. The more and more those, one of the things that you've just described there is around, you know, we're describing high assurance and the high assurance SD-WAN, and, you know, some of these functions are often quite problematic for the CISO and DPO. So the ability to deploy this, obviously physically, is kind of a tick box that can be done quite easily. But more and more, you know, environments are being virtualized, the edge is being virtualized, and it's how you can still maintain that protection. You know, you described before zero trust and the boundaries of that trust. And it's really important that there's quite a blurred line when you start introducing, say, the virtualization environments where that trust is. So the ability now to be able to kind of bring that, certainly the enforcement point, the Certes element, into that virtual environment is a massive benefit to those DPOs and CISOs.
Yeah, and I know, you know, it's when I see what comes out of our product solutions group, some of the great things they're doing around deployment of our Certes virtual enforcement point on third-party servers like, you know, Cisco platforms, Fortinet platforms, Sienna platforms, even in a sort of NFV, a network function virtualization deployment. It's great to see how, you know, we've made that integration really very easy. So again, you know, we're fitting into those deployment models that the market is demanding from us. So in terms of this is really the last slide here from us. Just to recap, so High Assurance SD-WAN, it's a framework. It's something that brings together high assurance solutions from Certes with leading SD-WAN solutions from the likes of Cisco, Fortinet, Aruba, those guys, and brings them together to allow them to work in high assurance or regulated environments. And the reason, again, why that's really come together and why we've been able to make real inroads with our technology alliance partners, the vendors who are actually building SD-WAN, is that they are seeing some of these challenges around taking their offerings into those high assurance customers. Again, high assurance, we mean government, public sector, regulated enterprises like financials, critical national infrastructure, healthcare, those sorts of things, and we allow them to tick the boxes when it comes to that process of working with data protection officers, chief information security officers, who are very much focused on concepts like zero trust, separation of duties, micro-segmentation, or as I like to call it, risk reduction, and encryption offload. So I'd like to say thank you very much for listening. Carinne, I'll hand back to you for the Q&A session now, please.
Thank you so much. We had a couple of questions, I think, through the course of your slides, which one of you've already answered. Another question we've had asked is about outsourcing. If I have outsourced contracts, does this solution still applicable for my network if it's provided by somebody else?
Yeah, so I can take that. So that's really interesting, because one of our routes to market is actually working with those outsourcers, and the reason being is that many of the providers who are providing either WANs, whether it's a legacy WAN or whether it's an SD-WAN, one of the things that they're becoming very aware of is that they're carrying a lot of regulated data. And with the way regulation works now, some of that risk is falling onto them because they're knowingly carrying that data. They're entering into contracts with customers that they know working in regulated environments. So they're inevitably carrying that regulated data. So there's two things they can do. They can either undertake very heavy controls within their own environments to try and mitigate some of that risk. Or they can deploy a technology like Certes, which is a technology, because we've got that separation of duties, a technology that can be delivered as a managed service. So an infrastructure service provided by the service provider that overlays on top of the WAN, whether it's a legacy WAN or SD-WAN that's being delivered, but in a way where the customer can be provided control of the policies and keys that are protecting that customer's data. So it helps them in terms of a risk reduction. It helps them because it's obviously a revenue stream for them. And also it puts the risk back on the customer to make sure that their data, their sensitive data, is protected before it exits the trusted or semi-trusted environment onto the WAN. So Matt, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
No, I think you covered that really well. So we that's our kind of requirements for working with our partner community, and obviously the end customer ultimately, but our partner community is to maintain that revenue stream for them, but still providing, as you've mentioned, still providing that level of security direct to the customer. They need to own their own keys. That's kind of in a way, you don't give your house keys to anyone. However, there's a requirement where you still have to allow certain people in, but that has to be controlled. You don't give them access to everything.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I've got one other question as well around the encryption with SD-WAN. So encryption is built into many SD-WAN offerings. Are these typically FIPS 140-2 certified encryption offerings?
Okay, so there's two ways to answer that. There's a short version and a longer version. I think the crypto that's built into some of these offerings, we're aware of some of the vendors who are moving down the path of undertaking those certifications. Now, we've done those, but they are capable of achieving FIPS 140-2. But what we need to be mindful of is that it's not just the validation of the encryption that is important here. It's the separation of duties. It's the micro-segmentation that is really very, very important. So, whether the SD-WAN solution itself has FIPS 140-2 is really irrelevant, because it's still a network-based function rather than a function under the control of the Data Protection Office.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, I haven't got any other questions that have come through. I'll just quickly check, but I think we're good on that, and I'm conscious of time as well. So if no one has anything else to add or ask at this point, I think it's a good time for us to wrap this session up. Just thank everybody for their time this afternoon. Thank you to the presenters. Thank you for the attendees. This is a start of a series of webinars that we want to run. We want to sort of introduce some tech talks around High Assurance SD-WAN. So please follow us on social media and look out for more details for webinars that are going to be coming up in the next 6 to 8 weeks. You're obviously more than welcome to join us and carry on the conversation. If you want to know more about our technology and what we're doing, feel free to get in touch. There's some great explainer videos on YouTube. We're obviously present on Twitter and on LinkedIn as well, or reach out to us personally. More than happy to keep the conversation going with you guys. So thank you very much for your time today. Thanks everybody, and hopefully we'll speak soon.